Welcome to Lens of Leadership, our Ted Lasso rewatch podcast. Before we dive into this episode's leadership lessons, let's watch a quick recap.
Season 2, Episode 2 starts off with Jamie Tart getting kicked off reality TV. Nate yells at Will for adding Lavender to the laundry. Ted is not exactly pleased that Dr. Sharon is still around. Biscuits with the boss definitely does not work on her. Ted and Higgins are masters of dad puns. Both Ted and Rebecca are skeptical of therapy. Keeley appreciates Roy's press conference. Jamie meets Ted at the bar and tells him he is awesome. Great. Okay. Terrible. It's all shit, Ted. Sam sees Jamie and Ted on Twitter and cusses at Ted. Roy brings his own fruity language as a pundit, but enjoys being back in the game in a way. Dr. Sharon and Ted finally connect a bit. This episode ends with Jamie running onto the pitch as snow begins to fall in AFC Richmond.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nick Caniglio.
And I'm Marnie Stockman, and this is Lens of Leadership, a Ted Lasso rewatch podcast. We're the authors of Lead It Like Lasso, a leadership book for life, your life.
And this podcast is an extension of many of the elements outlined in our book. We invite you to join us as we take a deep dive into each episode and explore the leadership principles as they play out in the series. And for today's episode, we're diving into Season 2, Episode 2, Lavender. We're excited to jump to a number of different topics with our special guest, Lucy Broadbent.
We're so excited. One of the best things about the Ted Lasso community are the people. And we're fortunate enough to have connected with Lucy before we had even released Lead It Like Lasso. Lucy had already written her first Ted Lasso book, What Would Ted Lasso Do? We got a copy right away, and we were impressed with her research and writing on the positive psychology used in the show.
We are excited to say hello to Lucy Broadbent. Hey, Lucy.
Hi, hello.
Lucy, thanks so much for joining us. And we wanted to jump right in. So in this episode, Sam gets wind that Jamie's coming back to AFC Richmond, and he really, at this point, he gets pretty angry and gets way out of character.
Hey, Sam, I'm just trying to help the team here. Bullshit.
I think given the way that Sam was treated by Jamie, this seems pretty reasonable. But the whole notion of heightened emotions reminds us a bit of how we heard that your own story and the impetus and the reason for writing what would Ted Lasso do? We'd love for you to share that story with our audience on kind of how the whole book came to be and the story about maybe the situation in the parking lot.
Oh, yes, the situation in the parking lot.
Yes.
So I think that Season 2 had finished running, and Ted Lasso was on my mind, and I do adore it, and I'm thinking about it. Anyway, I'm sitting there in the parking lot, and I'm actually not even moving, and someone scrapes the side of my car, and Ted Lasso comes immediately to mind, and I think instead of leaping out and yelling at the person, I just did a sort of an odd moment, and I thought, okay, what would Ted Lasso do in this circumstance? Because ultimately I knew he would be kind. So I tried a different tack to my usual kind of cursing, and it was awfully nice in the way that, Brits quite sometimes can be, and in the way that Ted Lasso always is. And so I was awfully nice, and it was the right thing to do because it was a little old lady, and it wasn't that bad. But the thing that was surprising to me ultimately was how it made me feel walking away. That was the key thing. So instead of being all riled up and angry about a car, I actually felt really good about myself. I felt, oh, good. I actually handled that quite nicely, and I feel good about it. And that got me thinking about other aspects. I found myself thinking about how Ted Lasso would react in certain circumstances. If he's standing in the checkout line in the supermarket, he is nice and courteous to the checkout. He would engage in conversation. I'm a kind of chatty person anyway, but that was what got me going down that avenue. And my background is journalism, and I used to work for newspapers, and we used to always write features around TV shows that everybody is watching, and I could see it formulating. And before I knew it, there was the idea for a book. I mean, if you extrapolate all of the things, there's so much actually in the TV show that you can turn into a book, as you yourselves know.
Absolutely.
That's so, as I mentioned in the opening, that we saw that your book was out before we had even released Lead It Like Lasso. And so I wanted to read it and see like, oh, are we retelling the same stories? But yours was very much around the positivity, and the psychology of Ted Lasso, which I loved, whereas ours focused on leadership. And there were so many other avenues that we could have gone down before. But what I liked about What Would Ted Lasso Do is that in each chapter, you picked a big theme to think about. And one of the most powerful ones, I think, is vulnerability, especially for the episode that we're talking about here. So in the middle of, we're at season 2, episode 2, and amidst change, and change is hard, right? We've got Jamie going from reality TV to begging to get a job back. Nate is dealing with the promotion of his own promotion, and then yelling at Will for putting Lavender in the, to calm the players down when they're about to go take on a soccer or football match. Higgins is changing offices. Roy hasn't quite figured out life after the pitch, and Ted is having to deal with Dr. Sharon as an influence on the team. So we'll actually start with, I'll let Nick reference the scene that I want to talk about with Dr. Sharon and therapy in general.
Yeah, so kind of reminding our audience of this episode. So in this episode, both Ted and Rebecca show that they're clearly skeptical about therapy.
You ever been to a therapist, Rebecca?
What for? I can diagnose myself in a heartbeat. I thought being invulnerable would protect me, so I pushed people away for years, leading me directly to my greatest fear. Being alone. Big whoop.
Big whoop. Yeah, I don't get it. Why pay someone to do what a friend should do for you for free?
Exactly. I mean, that's why you have friends, isn't it? I mean, to burden them with your issues and anxiety.
And we know in your book, What Would Ted Lasso Do? You kind of reference this skepticism. And so the question, long-winded question here, as leaders, and I think I'm one of them, we often grapple with the balance between personal support systems and professional help. Any thoughts on how leaders or anyone can encourage openness to seeking professional support like therapy while still fostering, strong, supportive team dynamics? How do you see that? How do you see that tension playing out, between the support network and therapy?
Well, I think that was really the crux of the whole series, actually, wasn't it? I mean, and I think the answer is to keep talking about it. I think talking about mental health was a sort of almost a taboo subject, and as leaders, in a lot of businesses, nobody talks about it. I think that's still true. Then it becomes almost like a buzzword, maybe too far. Everyone's now, and then, but the point about a TV show is that it normalizes it. A long time ago, I interviewed some of the producers of Modern Family.
Modern Family.
Yeah. Modern Family.
And which normalized gay couples race, and it was a very significant moment in TV show. I'm so pleased we got there, because it normalized it. So Ted Lasso, I think, it normalizes the idea of talking about mental health. There he is with Rebecca, and although they've got to turn it into something that's funny, and there he is with Rebecca, and they're saying, oh, I wouldn't touch therapy, I wouldn't, which mimics so much of what a lot of people really think. It's terrifying, and I think that the show received a lot of, as well as critical acclaim for its show businessness, but acclaim from therapists themselves, who were so grateful and they felt that it was a really realistic representation of what a lot of people go through going to therapy. They're resistant, they're frightened, and these are perfectly normal reactions. And so in terms of leadership, when you're in a business, the point is to just keep talking, isn't it? And So Rebecca and Ted do eventually come to terms with it, and it's helpful to both of them, and we see that outcome. So therefore, it's helpful to everybody. I mean, I think that is my answer. Keep talking.
Yeah. Well,
Well, and I love that the actors will just say exactly what you said, what everybody else is thinking, right? Like, oh, that's what I have friends for. But then Ted gives the answer, right? Or like, oh yeah, we just burden that, isn't, you know, oh, right, that is what I'm doing. Okay. So it helps us see the flaws in our own emotional intelligence while while the show is going on, and we're all just kind of smacking ourselves in the head, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. You also wrote the book Lioness or Panda. I think that was one of my favorite scenes in season 1, where, you know, Rebecca is walking out to the car and Keely's asking, you know, Ted if she would be a lion or a panda. My favorite part of that is Jamie saying, "Coach, I'm me. Why would I want to be anybody else?" Right? So, but your book focused on relationship with women and themselves in and out of work, right? And so when in this season, Jamie who for sure was a lion, right? Like his attitude was lion all season 1. He walks into the bar to see Ted because he wants to beg for his job back. And when Ted asks him how he's doing, he says, "Great, awesome, terrible, awful. It's all shit, Ted." That might be the first time I've ever cussed on a podcast. So I don't, we're probably breaking YouTube right now.
How you been?
Awesome.
Yeah?
Best. Pretty good. Okay. A little depressed. Yeah. It's all shit, Ted.
So is he a panda, or is he doing the brave work of a lion, or is that like, how do you see that as you looked up the differences between sort of the representation of the panda and lion?
It's so interesting that you see it that way, because you know, inside my head, I was only applying it to women. So it's interesting you're applying it to Jamie. And you know, in all of these things, there's never any definitive one or the other, is it? They're all sort of they're all mindsets, aren't they? And so Jamie was being honest. Eventually he's honest and he drops his facades. Is that being a lion, to drop your facade and be vulnerable? I think that it is, actually. I think there is strength in, well, when we talk about people, whether they're lions or pandas, lions, that you're talking about strength, ultimately. Rebecca describes it at the very beginning. It's all about being the ruler of the jungle, and strength. And so then I guess the question is in that instance regarding Jamie, he goes through the full gamut of emotions, but ultimately he's sharing what he's really being. And you're talking about vulnerability there. And I think that is one of the themes of the shows. That's a running theme too, and Sarah Niles, who plays Dr. Sharon, has talked about that she really wanted a role in which vulnerability was part of the play, and how Brené Brown has spoken often that vulnerability is strength. And so rather than, I mean, you know, you can do it lioness or panda. I turned it into a female thing because I thought it was a female moment, but we're all of these things, aren't we, at all various different times. And how do you move forward in life, you know, to our own advantage? I think you kind of recognize where you are, perhaps, and that's where you can really start to move forward, recognizing, being vulnerable, being honest, and that is what ultimately wins Ted over. In Jamie's case, Ted's won over by that, and gives him a place back, and Jamie gets to where Jamie gets his second chance. So I think, have I answered the question?
I think you have. I think that
Well,
was
yeah,
perfect,
I think so. I mean, to your point, the bravery of a lion, like Jamie took a risk by being vulnerable. So in that way, I do think the connection is pretty strong. So yeah, that made sense. That made sense to me. And here's another one that is, again, not, even though the book was really about, kind of the relationship between Keely and Rebecca and the supporting of women in their relationships, but we also saw Keely supporting Roy in his football punditry, a thing, right? Is like wanting him to become a football pundit, and there's this balance between strength and softness in how Keely has to approach Roy and how Roy has to think about it himself. He kind of has to become vulnerable in a way to say, maybe I do want to be around football. So similarly, like, is he lion or panda? He kind of runs through the gamut of emotions, I think, on that whole scenario as well.
Yeah, I think he probably does. I mean, again, I think it's just it's a spectrum, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think I wouldn't. I don't think. I think I'd be nervous to classify. I mean, you could look at any kind of moment at all for any one of us. Are you a lion or a panda? But I think that's not really the point, really. I think softness and strength, it says it quite well, actually. And we're all like that. And isn't that what they say, what all women want to do when they want their husbands to do something, is you coax them into thinking that their idea all along.
We won't play
You
this
have
to
me
your
thinking
husband.
now, Lucy. That would all make sense.
So it's interesting that you say, I had no intention of speaking of this. I don't even know what made me think of it, but you talked about the spectrum between lion and panda. We have I live in the middle of nowhere. We have a rural zoo up the street, and there's a Z-donk, which is half zebra, half donkey. And it actually fades from striped to brown. And so I'm trying to picture what the panda lion looks like in my mind. So what was easier for you? You wrote What Would Ted Lasso Do first?
Yes.
And then you wrote Lioness or Panda second. Were you thinking there needed to be a second one? Were just themes popping out everywhere and you just couldn't cram them all into one book? Which was easier for you, or are they both themes really popped up and you thought there was meat behind them?
Well, I think the first one was definitely easy to write. It sort of wrote itself. Because there's so much, and Jason Sudeikis has talked a lot himself. When you look through all the quotes and him in interview, I'm convinced he has read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
100%.
Yeah. So and there's so many positive psychology books, and the more I sort of looked into it, the more I could think, oh yeah, they're advocating this. They are surely saying that. And then, so that was a sort of almost an easy book to write. The second one came along because you will remember that the women's soccer, so it's end of season 3 ends with the suggestion of Rebecca, of Keely to Rebecca of a women's team. Which may, of course, yet still prove to be seasons 4. Who knows? But at the same time, the Women's World Cup was taking place, and suddenly I got very caught up in Women's World Cup because I thought it was a phenomenal female story, and then at the same time, when they were filming the final seasons of Ted Lasso, the UEFA Cup was happening. For women at the time, and the Britain's female football team, known as the Lionesses, won. So Britain would have been they were blown away by this. And so this was, this was at their home team winning a UEFA Cup final. It was astonishing. It was really big. And they were filming Ted Lasso at the time. That will not have been lost on them, I thought to myself. And so no surprise, it sort of ends up in the last little bit. And so then I find that the extraordinary story about how women were held back in female soccer. Women were not allowed, women were banned from playing soccer for 50 years, which is extraordinary. So I sort of I'm afraid I got on my high horse, really. And there were so many, I was always taken with the idea of how, and both Hannah Waddingham and Juno Temple have talked about their characters, how they met in the washroom, and they're in a cast full of men, and they expect the two female characters to be pitted against each other. So they then are thrilled and delighted when these characters play supporting, mentoring, one mentors the other, they play supporting roles to each other. That's a sort of, I have always been lucky in my life. I've, fantastic women who have mentored me and been kind to me. And, I think that the television presents a world that's not actually true in my work experience. Women have been fantastic. And so that's how I ended up writing How to Be a Lioness, which was really the female component to the show, which and you can just see it all the way through. They were doing something different. I felt they were doing something different for the female characters, and that was worth writing about. And you can turn that into all sorts of things. I may have got a bit too hung up on women's soccer, but we'll see.
It's funny. We do a we have a master class in addition to our book around personal leadership. We have a character assessment, and we always are, amazed as we kind of talk through. I think Rebecca is somewhat obvious in a lot of the traditional attributes of a leader, but we're amazed at how many different attributes around good leadership principles Keely demonstrates throughout the whole series. I mean, it's eye-opening when you start really parsing, as Marnie and I do every single episode, looking at it through a lens of leadership, because it's not obvious right at you, but as you kind of lick through it, it's like, that's exactly how I want to work with somebody. And you talk about the relationship between her and Rebecca. I enjoyed it. My whole family, my son, my wife enjoyed the relationship and seeing how that worked. But you brought up a little bit where season 4 might go, and we talked about the women's league. And I think a lot of people, when they think about, okay, is season 4 going to happen? That seems to be the most popular prediction of where it might go. But I was curious, and we're both curious. You've written the 2 books, obviously. Is there a third book that's kind of percolating in your head that you're thinking about around Ted Lasso, or might there be with the introduction of season 4?
I think there's so much that show lends itself to. I had thought about it, and I think there are other things that could be explored.
Okay. Any particular themes that you want to share, or is it too early for that?
Well, I think forgiveness is a theme. That's a fairly obvious one, I think. I think that's the one that comes to mind. But what do you think? What other themes would you explore?
Oh, there's
so
many.
we almost subtitled our book A Roadmap at the Intersection of Self-Help and Leadership, because self-help and self-care was such an important part. And it is a part so Nick mentioned our character assessment in the book, and we do strengths and weaknesses of 5 of the characters. And Ted clearly is a strong, he's the positivity guru. Those are his strengths. But one of the things that Ted was terrible with was self-care, right? Because he was so busy helping others and being positive for others that he didn't take care of himself. So we definitely think there are a lot of self-help. And we think that, our number one rule in the book is everyone is a leader, or is leadership is life, and everyone is a leader. And it's that personal leadership that matters. And that just so blends into self-help that I think that's a thread that runs through it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so true. And I think that there's, from what I've read, there is a lot of conversation about self-care. You have to take, like being on the airline, you have to take care of yourself first before you start.
Exactly.
I think there's a lot of merit to that. I mean, who knows? I think we're at the early stages where people are considering mental health. It's a new thing. It's relative, in the last decade, isn't it? So
Yeah.
where are we all going to be in the next 10 years? And that's a really interesting, how are we all going to improve it? I would hope that, we all, there's so much more now that we're so much more aware of. 30 years ago, no one really bothered thinking about exercise, and now it's all part of the natural conversation. It's everyone understands if you want to stay fit, you exercise. But I think for my parents' generation, I didn't think they actually thought about that. Wellness wasn't a term. It just wasn't. So now here we all are, and what leadership places are waking up to it. Where is that going to lead next? That's what I'm curious to know. We all want to see into the future, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, especially when it comes to season 4. I think we're all, the internet's abuzz with what that could be. So I mentioned that we have rules in our book, and one of the things that we talk about in there are life hacks, which we loved Ted Lasso's scene with his trick plays. So we call them trick plays. So if there was a trick play / life hack called the Lucy Broadbent, what would that be?
Well, do you know what? I'm not really sure that I know what I would say. Kindness. I think that I was taken with a kindness. I haven't got a life hack.
I mean, my mom would say you get more flies with honey, right, than you do with vinegar, type of thing. And I do think that is a life hack if people understand, like, you got your car hit and you left the scene feeling better than you did when you got there. That is a life hack. That's, in the world of mental health, that's a way better way to handle that.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah. I think you've got to stay positive. You have to believe, don't you? You do have.
Yes,
I have
all the things.
I put up this little sign because, I mean, to be honest, excuse me. I brought out this book. I've never done anything like it before. It's a self-published book. I don't shy away from saying it. I've been published with traditional publishers before. The book came about, I had the idea of it. I pitched it to several publishers, book publishers. We didn't know when season 3 was coming out. I had the CEO of a publishing company on the phone within 3 days of me pitching the idea. So I knew I was onto something. But then he having got all excited, and I'm sort of like spending all the oodles of advance he was going to give me, obviously, and I could see him talk himself out of it. He said the problem is we don't know when season 3 is, and I might not, season 3 could come out and I couldn't have my book published. It takes me as a traditional book publisher a very long time to bring out a book. He said, and of course you could self-publish in half the time, or even no time at all. And I thought, I gave up on the idea, didn't think about it, and then it kept annoying me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to look into this. So that's how I did it. And every single step of the way, I thought, good God, you're out of your depth. Really, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, it sounds really hokey to say it, but you do have to have a certain and go, okay, Ted Lasso said believe. He's telling me to believe. So I got myself this sign. I paid for an editor who ran off with my money. I mean, I did everything wrong that you could possibly do. And there's, all this instruction on launch dates and so on. I didn't have a launch date. It's sort of like it went out with a sort of like a whimper rather than a bang, And but still here I am, and I've sold an awful lot of copies, which I really had very low expectation. I mean, there's a catchphrase. Have low expectations and you'll be pleasantly surprised.
I think that is my life hack, Lucy. I love that. Set the bar low and exceed them, right? With a little belief. And you know, our rule number 11 is manifested, and it sounds like you did something. You just made it happen, right? You said, okay, this is going to happen, and you made it happen.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. That's I'd be very proud if I were you. That's really neat.
Well, it's been fun. I mean, it's been really fun. And you know, and it has been so lovely. I mean, I hope you found this experience too, meeting people in this Ted Lasso community. Really, really smart, lovely people. You know, I interviewed there's Coach Beard's book club. They do a podcast. So I think they've gone very quiet recently. There's I mean, it's just some fantastic people I've met, including the lovely lady who does Ted Lasso tours. She's a gem. So anyway, and the wonderful woman who runs Canva, who does Canva workshops, and she's a Ted Lasso enthusiast. I mean, these are really lovely people that I've met.
I think Marnie and I say it almost every day. The best part about this whole experience in writing this book is having the chance to meet and engage with people in the community. It was unexpected, but at the same time, it's been the most rewarding part of this whole journey, including today, Lucy. Thank you for taking the time to join us. This has been great.
I've got a quick question for you. I mean, did you see it coming that it was going to be such a big phenomenon? Because I mean, they've got a Ted Lasso museum in Richmond. I mean, it's big now. It's global. Did you see that coming?
I didn't personally. But.
Yeah. Although, you know, I felt like at some point it had the same hook that like The Office did. And as we were talking about writing the book, I told my daughter, who's 22, and of course at that age, since you know everything, it's just best to get advice from 22-year-olds because they know all the answers. And I suggested the book, and she said, "No, Mom, like it's just a TV show. It's going to pass. You can't write a book on it." And I said, "Little miss, since you're currently staying in my house, you are going to watch the first 3 episodes. And then you come talk to me about whether or not we should write this book." And I went out grocery shopping and took a walk. And I come back into her dancing, yelling, Roy Kent, he's here, he's there, he's every everywhere, Roy Kent. And I said, and there you go. So now what do you think? She's like, "Oh yeah, you guys need to write this book." So she saw then that like, yeah, there's a spirit behind this show and the community. I mean, to hop on Facebook and see a group of 86,000 people that are dissecting every bit of Ted Lasso. And then finally, I walked into a local gift shop and I saw a book about Schitt's Creek. And I thought, I think Ted Lasso definitely has more meat on its bones in terms of the whole world wanting to be better because of this show. Those were the hints to me. But still, I mean, I don't think.
But to be fair, we didn't even realize the community existed when we started writing this book, right? We just didn't. And then as we did more and more research, and we ran across the likes of Lucy Broadbent of the world and all these different communities in the Lassoverse, we were like, oh my goodness, there is people feel the same way that we felt about the show when we watched it, and we thought we were like the only people in the world, you know, besides our inner circles that really like the show. And it was like, wow, this is what a great bunch of people, because you know they share those same ideals of positivity and vulnerability and all the things that the show brought across to viewers, and it was just awesome.
Yeah, isn't it? It is interesting. It's really, and what's so funny, when the season 3 came out, I feel so invested in it now, and I love it so much that I saw some of the critics. Some of them were not particularly kind about season 3, and I found I took it personally.
Where are they? You need to speak with us. We will let you know and set you straight.
Haters gonna hate, right? I mean, but it was so undeserving because it was such a good season. It was such a good season.
And it worked as an arc. I
Yes.
must say, I have total confidence in them because they obviously know how to get it right. But I am a little bit nervous for the season 4 because you can have something really brilliant, and I hope it's as good. Because they've got something that's really magic, and I would hate them to be having to stretch it out and eke it out and lose some of that, dilute it, I suppose I'm saying.
And I think it's somewhat comforting that they've been so apprehensive about moving forward with such a thing, right? And if you feel like if they actually do it, then we have such confidence in the writers of the show and the creators of the show that they probably have something that they think is really good. At least that's my hope and my thought process.
I agree. And every time in the show, when you thought you knew where it was going, they surprised you with something somehow better than what you were already excited about. So I'm just gonna believe.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So before we go, and thank you so much, tell folks, is Amazon the best place to find your books? Is where I found them, but is it like, are you self-published and have it on your website?
Yeah, Amazon is the place. You can go to my website, but it'll just ultimately lead you eventually back to Amazon. So
All roads.
Yes.
roads lead to Amazon, yes. And here they are. Here's copies. Here they are. I suppose I have to wave them in the air. But
I appreciate that, especially since mine are on Kindle, and so I didn't have the paperback to wave in the air, but I've enjoyed them for sure. Read them multiple times, as a matter of fact. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're awesome. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you for starting this conversation. Lovely. Really lovely.